Welcome to Office Hours. I'm here with Yu-Wen, who has just come back from her studies in Taiwan for these past several months.
Yeah.
And I guess this is the last time that I'll be doing Office Hours.
Also
and
my last
and also
time,
your
I
last
think.
time. And this is actually a good occasion then to say something, to thank Yu-Wen, because when we began the idea for creating China X, she had been the head teaching fellow in our college course here at Harvard, SW12. And she was willing to step up and help in a course which we called Creating China X. How do we create an online course for Chinese history?
What a brave idea.
It was a brave idea indeed. And, you know, the people in that course, Megan Morrissey, Tiffany
Yes.
Wong, Liu
Yes.
Junjie, they all came to work for China X, and they've been with us ever since. The result was great.
Yeah.
And but I think it's fair to say that without Yu-Wen's work, and she actually gave up, I would say, around a year of her dissertation research to help make this work, it would not have been possible. So thank you very much.
I learned so much from
Thank
the
you.
experience.
Now, this week, apparently our learners learned a lot too, but they were not terribly happy with what they learned.
Because of the new technologies?
Yes, that annotation system for both for the novel, The Scholars,
Yes.
but also The Scroll and Prosperous Suzhou.
Yes.
It was very difficult, very difficult.
It was an experiment.
It was an experiment, right? And
Yeah.
we just did this once. We need to work a lot out, a lot of content for this whole module. We have a frequently asked questions, troubleshooting discussion forum thread. Priscilla, and you've been really helpful. Thanks a lot for lots of people. We realize it's a steep learning curve that only really worked on Google Chrome, and then even with Google Chrome it was a problem.
Yeah.
We had to figure out what the problems were so we can try to make it into something useful. There's so much content in this module. We're extending the deadline. We also have actually a fairly easy credit mechanism. All you have to do is say that you actually spent time reading the novel and looking at the painting. But we are extending the deadline by a week, and we commiserate with you about the difficulties of using the annotation tool. By the way, you know, we got something like 40 pages of notes from Tiffany, from the staff. So many people, so many comments. And these are just comments on the scroll and on the novel. There's no possibility we're going to get through them all. But there were some questions, and Yu-Wen, since you really do modern history, I'm going to ask you the questions. One was, how was The Scholars received? Did it spur reform?
It didn't spur any reform. But it did have an impact.
Okay.
The impact
What do you
on later intellectuals, literati scholars, to reflect on what was going wrong in the society. And in fact, The Scholars became one of the most influential masterpieces of satire that in the later Imperial China, especially in late Qing, when Chinese society was experiencing a series of crises. And together with a few other works of satire.
So in some sense, literati could say it's our own fault,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Were there ever women scholars or only men?
Women write a lot, but going to examination system and to acquire a degree and become official wasn't usually what women would do.
Wasn't usually, or ever? There were cases?
I don't think so.
No, okay.
Yeah,
so,
let me be more precise.
so it's really till the 20th century
Yes.
that, and even today in China, women as high officials are not so common.
Not so common. We have
There are
some.
some, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, somebody pointed out that they were talking about the Dream of the Red
Yes,
Chamber and
yeah.
A Story of the Stone, and they said the author of that was from a family of bannermen, something you've learned from Professor Elliott's discussions. And he wanted to know how the bannermen fitted into the Ming examination system.
I'm afraid there weren't any bannermen in
Ming, so they didn't. But how about in
didn't.
Qing?
Yes.
They did.
Yeah.
So these are, although they're in the military and their banner system, they can
Yes.
still do the exams.
They could still do that.
I see. Okay. And then somebody said, I'd like to learn a little bit more about the life of everyday people, what they did at home, what they used to eat, the way of socializing, way of celebrating.
Now, I would suggest that there were, especially starting from late Ming period as what you talked about in the module, then I think the best source for understanding this kind of knowledge is to read novels and operas and watch
and short stories.
Short
and
stories,
like
yes,
that.
yes.
And we don't really have other sources, right?
There are, of course, we have scholarship on on those questions, but I think the most direct way to get a sense about how life looked like was to go through those stories yourself.
You know, it occurred to me, though, there's another source, much harder to read and not very often translated, which are court cases.
Court cases, yes.
Of course,
Yes.
of people suing each other. And
Yes,
doing all sorts of
exactly.
things,
And scholars found them tremendously useful.
Modern scholars have found
Modern
them,
scholars and late Imperial Chinese historians also found so.
Okay. Well, we should move on. What surprised you most about what you've heard in the lecture and about in the novel? And there were some interesting points made that people were surprised that people were able to buy degrees. China White makes this point very nicely. And Jian 451 makes the point as well that you could be, not so much that the exams could be passed with cash as that you could gain access. There were certain kinds of exams, degrees that were for sale, or that entrance to an exam could be purchased for a high price. You know, there have been so many comments and so many annotations. We apologize. We really can't go through them and cite all the people we'd like to cite. But they were interesting. We enjoyed reading them, but we were overwhelmed. There was a poll, though, and the poll had to do with what happened with Wang Mian.
Yeah, it's
right?
a very interesting result here.
And, of course, Wang Mian is actually the first story in the book,
Yeah.
although we didn't let you see it until the end. And what was he going to do? And actually, the question was run away and live a life of a hermit, or ignore rumors and live his life in the village, or work for the ruler and reform the civil service examination system. People thought that he wanted to just ignore the rumors and live his life. Around 41%,
41%.
or around 26% thought he wanted to work for the ruler and reform. But I think the right answer was he wanted to run away and live the life of a hermit. No?
That's what exactly happened?
I thought that was what happened. Am I wrong about that?
He definitely didn't go and serve the government.
He certainly didn't do that.
Yes.
And that's interesting.
Why do you think it's interesting?
I think because it's a suggestion by even Wu Jingzi, the author, that serving the government is not necessarily the only thing you can do in life to be an honorable person. And that in some ways being a truly idealistic life might mean not participating in political power at all.
Do you think it's a very positive?
I don't know. You know, it seems to me that this whole thing is about compromise, right? Compromise of ideals, compromise of standards, everything.
So you think going to serve the government will let him compromise his idealistic view?
I think that's
about
his
learning.
I think that's Wang Mian's view, that
So
at this moment in time it would.
It's interesting because, I mean, some people say that Wang Mian actually represent what kind of person that Wu Jingzi himself wants to be. So he didn't choose to continue looking for or pursuing a degree after he failed many times, and he decided to live a life by writing stories, and especially critical stories. So to maintain a kind of distance between himself and the systems, but at the same time as a way to reflect on the system. So can we say that at this point in Chinese history, perhaps we are going to see more and more literary scholars or intellectuals taking a standing point as a critic?
I think that may be right, don't you? I think that's
we will know better.
We'll know better later,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Wait and see.
Yeah.
So we had a question. Do you agree with Wu Jingzi's condemnation of Chinese society in the hands of the literati? The civil service examination was supposedly based on principle of fairness. After this week's module, do you think social life in mid-18th century China was basically fair or unfair?
You know, Professor Ro, I don't really like this question.
Why not?
First, I'm not entirely sure that Wu Jingzi had a very, very absolute answer or clear viewpoint about the issues of the fairness or unfairness of life. I think, from my view, that he's trying to show how the system works. Sometimes in a better way, sometimes in a worse way, perhaps frequently in a worse way. And then he wants to show what the institution means for people's daily life and how human interactions take place in the setting of this institutional world, and let the audience to see what are the elements that they think might be problematic, and who are the people, who are the victims, and who are the winners. And instead of making a very strong point and to show whether it is fair or not, because he cares. I think he cares more about the simple question about whether a system is fair or not.
Okay, so in some sense that what we ought to be looking for is a society is made up of all sorts of values. There's kinship.
Yes.
There's
it's intertwined.
Moral idealism and things like this, and they're connected. And he's looking at the way in which the examination system interpenetrates, we might say, with all these other different values and institutions in society.
Yes.
From family to moral ideals.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So next time I won't ask the question that way. Okay. It's terrible to be criticized by your own graduate student. You have to learn to live with it.
I think we were also criticized by some of our students.
We were criticized by some of our students. That's
For
true.
instance, Du Bois Shop comments, "Is the only solution to drop out and live on a mountain? I don't think so, and I don't think it's really fair to come down too hard on the side of this area, of this era of Chinese society, at least on the elusive topic of fairness." And because he said they were struggling to do better, and we still are.
We still are. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. I stand corrected. Simon Cole says the following. He says, learning to pass examinations. It was a longer post, but I'm just quoting one line. Learning to pass examinations does not in itself make one a good person. Why should intellect alone lead to moral, upright behavior? What do you say to that?
On one hand, you can challenge Wu Jingzi with this question. You can ask him to answer you. And on the other hand, I think what we learn from the novel is that we see that, at least from his point of view, the literati scholars think that there should be a connection between examination system and morality. So otherwise, it is a sign or it is a symbol to show that society is failing in some way.
So the desire then to actually make a connection between morality and learning and intellect
is something driving
this whole thing.
I think. And I kind of like it.
Yeah. Okay. You want there to be a connection.
I do.
There. You want there to be a connection.
Yeah, I do.
There. Okay. Now, we're going to skip over the annotation of the paintings of the Prosper Suzhou scroll. We really liked it. We thought you might like it too, and we wanted, we asked for a lot of silly things: find the farmer, find the school. But in part, that was just to get you to look carefully, not to just pass over, but look into the scroll, look into the scenes. And the final question we asked was: so we've given you the scholars and the scroll, and they're both from the same time. So what? What do you make of that? And I think the common thing we got was that, for example, from Karen Mack, was scholars shows the rot in society, and Xu Yang's scroll shows an idyllic landscape of urban Suzhou. And Rodnea talks about ideal or cynical. And Henrique Silva says he notes the scholars as satirical in a surprising different way from what he expected. John Farrell makes a nice point. Only Americans will understand this, perhaps, but we have something in America called the Chamber of Commerce, which promotes local business and sort of conservative values. And he says, I think the scroll is from the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you for explaining that point.
And the scholars is more personal and gives the sausage-making view of things. What is sausage? You know what that means? Sausage making view?
It's dirty, it's messy.
It's dirty and messy.
It's
and
not idealistic.
But the sausage tastes really good when it comes out.
Yes.
But you don't want to see how it's made, right?
Yeah.
In this case, it's the dirty side of society.
Also, there is a price to pay in order to have a society like
maybe
how it look like. Yeah.
And Ando Romo talks about this as being unrealistic and realistic, with the scroll being unrealistic and the scholars being realistic. And I thought I would ask you about that because is this, would you agree with that? That's unrealistic and realistic, that's the contrast?
Well, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
if you think that both both the scroll and the novel are forms of culture or artistic and literary forms, they both trying to make sense and trying to show some perspective. And so in this sense, I don't think the novel, why we would say the novel shows a more realistic image than the painting.
Okay, so that both painting and novel are particular depictions of the world as these people want to imagine it for their own purposes. One to please and satisfy and make everybody happy, the other one to alert people and criticize the way they act.
But another point perhaps we can make is that both Xu Yang and Wu Jingzi are trying to use some realistic approach.
Okay.
And so they have something in mind they want to achieve. They want to perhaps convince people with certain view of what.
I see. So everything in the novel and in the painting has to be recognizable to people. It has to seem real to them in order for the message, for the creator to do his work.
Yes. They don't mean to be abstract.
Right.
They mean to be concrete and to generate certain connections with the reader.
Okay. And perhaps that's a good way to stop, because what we've tried to do
I have one more question.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. So, Professor Bo, imagine that you are a graduate student and you haven't decided whether you want to pursue a PhD in Chinese studies. And after you see the scroll and the scholars and read the scholars, which work will push you more? Will inspire you to study China? The painting, the China in the painting, or the Chinese society in the novel?
Well, I'll give you my answer now. I'll give you my answer in the past. I'll give you my answer now. When Marco Polo went to China 1,000 years ago, almost 1,000 years ago, he depicted a world of wealth and lushness and available goods and entertainments, just like that scroll. And he said, this is an extraordinary world. And that was my first sort of exposure to middle period China, was through Marco Polo and his admiration for it. And I said, wow, I didn't know that before. I should study that. But I think now what I would say would be that it's the fact that both of these works exist at the same time. One with this very satirical, critical view, and the other with this very positive view, both of which actually say something interesting about merchants. Remember, in the novel, I think when Zhou Qin is able to take the examinations, because the merchants, without question, put together 200 ounces of silver, 200 taels of silver to pay for it, as if it's nothing. No ulterior motive. They just give it to him. Everyone else has ulterior motives. They don't. And in the prosperous Suzhou, it's a commercial urban center as well. But in any case, I think that the fact that in this society at this time, these two points of view could coexist, and I would want to study that world, the culture of the literati of that time. That's what I'd want to do.
Fair enough.
Okay, good. And remember, we're extending the deadline for a week on this section, and you have our sympathy in trying to make use of the annotation tool. We hope we'll improve it during the summer. Thanks a lot, and we've enjoyed having you. Goodbye.